as a whole, I think it's a really nice social way of gaming, but it's really underused, because obviously you have to pay to play, whereas with console gaming, you only need to, well, buy the console and the game, and then you can play it for free for the rest of the time that you own it.
As a gamer, I think the video arcades, while quite suited to the time in which they mainly emerged, like the 80s, 70s, 90s even, while they were best suited then to the sort of background general state of gaming at the time, I think they've quite lost their appeal in the days of mobile and cheaper console gaming.
I think the only real appeal with arcade gaming is, well, no, there's two. There's the social side, so playing alongside a friend with the shooters or the fighting games, etc. And then you've got the nostalgic appeal.
Well, mainly it would have been the whole generational console thing, like the start of probably proper console game industries with companies like Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft all entering the sort of three-way console war that really dragged attention away from arcades.
Unfortunately not, which is really, really sad, since arcade gaming was such a, major point in gaming history. No, I don't think it can.
It depends on what they can offer and whether they can update their stance on mobile and multiplayer gaming to sort of compete with the advantages offered by, say, consoles of online matchmaking and the enhanced mobility of mobile gaming, especially on smartphone platforms. I think if arcades can modernise and upgrade their whole business model to account for the advantages that consoles at home and mobile platforms on the move have over a stationary commercial venue in which gamers can congregate, then I suppose they can keep up with the times and compete well with the other gaming models.
In terms of, what it has as a future, online gaming is a possibility. There could be some kind of system devised so that people could play arcade games all over the world. But as social media, I really don't see any future for it at all. It's just something that has steadily declined since the release of console games.
For arcade gaming, given the general decline it's seen over the last decade, 2 decades or so, it's probably most pessimistic to say that arcades are quite going quite downhill and aren't likely to recover anytime soon unless they modernise in a way that allows them to compete with modern gaming platforms and gaming delivery systems like matchmaking systems on consoles and mobile platforms, and to help them to keep their vibrant multiplayer hub as arcades have, where gamers can congregate, without losing the same nostalgic appeal that maybe attracts older gamers.
"15 to 20 years is a long time. Year on year, businesses change, there are ups and downs in the economy. I started a long time ago, over 26 years ago, and we've had another recession in that time, and things are pretty tough for a lot of businesses. But more recently, games that come out on computers, mobile phones, the internet, all that has obviously had an effect. But not all of it's detrimental. So, I mean, on the whole, business is tough. It's a recession for everybody, but it's not dismal.
Business has been good and steady. We've noticed a downturn in the first 8 years of that timescale, but since then what we've noticed is a slow upturn, and we're levelling out now. So we're basically we're quite steady. We're quite happy with what we're doing. So we're not seeing a downturn now, whereas we did in the last 10 years.
I don't know whether revenue has disappeared completely. I think it's just coming from different sources. There are still games developers out there that are making a lot of money. Possibly the arcades aren't making as much money, but they're still selling, you know, in a lot of formats that they weren't selling on before. You know, when I started, arcades were pretty much the only place you could play a video game. Certainly the only place you can play a simulator. Now it's completely different. You can get them for free, you can spend 69p and you've got yourself a video game. Revenue is still coming in, it's just from different people.
I don't really have any thoughts on that, because I don't believe that there is a worldwide decline in it. I think basically you'll have some arcades that will succeed and some that will fail. I think the succession is basically based on what your plans are for the premises that you're operating. I think there's a market for every amusement arcade. I just think if you let it go stale, it will decline, just like everything. So I don't think there's a decline as such, because if there was a decline in amusement arcades, there'll be a decline in the industry, and there isn't a decline in the industry.
I think home gaming is a bit of a double-edged sword. Yes, people don't have to come into our arcade to play a game, so that's the negative. But it's also opened a bigger player base. When we started, it was teenage boys would play the fighting video games, and that was about it. Whereas these days, a lot of ladies, a lot of more mature people, they find the enjoyment of playing these games in a home environment, and hopefully when they come on holiday, they'll be more likely to come in and play one of our games. So yes, it's on one hand it's taken stuff away, on the other hand it's opened things up a bit. So I don't think it's all negative.
I think what it's done, it's played its part. Obviously, it's played its part, but I wouldn't say that it was basically the cause. I'd say more often the cause is expendable income. I think there's less expendable income within society today. There may not have been 5 years ago when everybody was using money on a credit card, but at the same time they were still using that money to repay their credit cards. And I think in the last 15 years we've seen a steady decline in available income, which has left the arcades scrambling around to try and find what there is for people to play. But in that respect, that enhances the games that are available in the coming years, because the industry itself is looking for other avenues. So I'd say yes, the home market has made a small negative impact, but overall I wouldn't say that was what was to blame. I'd say it's basically social circumstances.
It's going to be a challenging time, it really is. I mean, we can't compete on price with the home market. You know, you spend on one of my games the same as you would spend to buy a game for your PC or your telephone. But it's not going to be the same experience. And I think if our industry and the research and development keeps going, which they're finding hard, a lot of the manufacturers are finding it tough in our market as well. So there's possibly not so much R&D going into things. But I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think you've got to remain optimistic, and you've got to hope for the best and hope that new games will come out that will set us aside from the home market.
I see a very bright future for the video game arcade industry as a whole, because there will always be games that won't be good enough for the home market, and those games will always come to the amusement arcade. And as I said before, I think it's the manufacturers are always the same manufacturers, as in Sega, Codemasters, and now, like I said, there's a couple of other new companies that have come into the foray, if you will, of making video games specifically for amusement arcades that you won't see in the home market. So in that respect, yes, the home industry is robbing Peter, but the arcades are also robbing Paul. So whatever their gain is also our gain, because people will always be interested in video games, and there's always room for them in a good amusement arcade.
It's inevitable that people will continue to play the games on their phones and things. It's a great entertainment for them. But there's also a place for the social side of things. Families can come in, they can all play it together, rather than the kids sitting in their room and playing their mobile phone on their own, which is kind of a solitary thing, whereas if they come into our place, you know, the whole family can join in, and I think it's probably a healthier experience. So it's going to go off on one direction, but hopefully the arcades can move in the direction that the home entertainment can't compete with.